Biden's inauguration on January 20th.
Tomorrow will be the first time the incumbent president has missed his successor's swearing in more than 150 years without having the excuse of being dead or having recently resigned. The outgoing administration will be represented by Vice President Mike Pence. Joe Biden says he's pretty happy with Trump's no-show.
One of the few things he and I have ever agreed on. It's a good thing I'm not showing up.
President Trump is expected to depart the White House aboard the Marine One helicopter at around 8 a.m. local time, also skipping the customary morning tea with the incoming President and First Lady. A ceremonial farewell is being planned for Mr Trump at the Andrews Air Force Base, where he will take his final flight as President aboard Air Force One to his golf resort at Palm Beach in Florida. Mike Pence will not attend Trump's farewell. All living former presidents and first ladies, except 96-year-old Jimmy Carter and 93-year-old Rosalind Carter, are expected to attend Biden's inauguration and will travel with the new president and VP to Arlington National Cemetery, where they'll lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The inaugural balls across Washington have also been cancelled because of COVID. You'll see it all live right here on ABC News. But now, Chaz, to the very latest on the January 6th attacks on the US Capitol building that left 5 people dead, including a Capitol police officer. Court filings have revealed a high level of pre-planning and the potential for hostage-taking and even greater carnage. Congress was in joint session to recognise Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's Electoral College victory.
Let's go. Let's just start. Okay.
Presiding over what is usually a pro forma rubber stamp, Vice President Pence, who had come under intense pressure from the president to reject the election result. At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, a Save America rally was getting fired up by the president's lawyer, who, after having failed to get any judge to take his legal challenges to the election seriously, suggested a new strategy.
Let's have trial by combat.
President Trump had been promoting that protest for literally weeks, writing on Twitter before he was banned, "Be there, we'll be wild." The president took the stage just before noon and spoke for well over an hour, repeating baseless claims the election had been stolen from him.
But I said, something's wrong here, something's really wrong, can't have happened, and we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
And then he called his followers into action.
We're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. I love Pennsylvania Avenue. And we're going to the Capitol, and we're going to try and give... The Democrats are hopeless. They're never voting for anything. Not even one vote. But we're going to try and give our Republicans, the weak ones, because the strong ones don't need any of our help. We're going to try and give them the kind of pride and boldness that they need to take back our country.
And within the hour, thousands of Trump supporters headed up to Capitol Hill, where they pushed down barricades, forced their way past police, who in some cases waved them through. Minutes later, hundreds had smashed their way inside the building, erecting gallows, chanting "Hang Pence," some carrying hand ties, others pepper spray, knives, pipes, flagpoles and a stun gun. Meanwhile, 2 pipe bombs were found planted at the DC headquarters of both the Republican and Democratic parties, a possible decoy. Members of Congress sheltered under their desks, pushing furniture against doors, putting on gas masks, many evacuated to safer locations as security personnel focused on saving lives rather than defending the building. The whole thing veered from the scary to the surreal, including this exchange on the floor of the Senate itself, involving the self-appointed QAnon shaman, Jacob Chansley.
Look at this guy, he's got covered in blood. God bless you.
Yes.
You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face.
Meanwhile, just outside the House chamber, rioter Ashley Babbitt, an Air Force veteran, was shot in the neck by plainclothes police as she tried to climb through a window. She later died, as did Officer Brian Sicknick, who was bludgeoned to death by Trump supporters wielding a fire extinguisher. 3 of the protesters collapsed and died from medical conditions. Amid the chaos, urgent calls for reinforcements were being sent out, while back at the White House, President Trump was reportedly watching it all on live TV and tweeting, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution." It was Pence himself who then authorised deployment of the National Guard, going over the president's head. 2 hours later, as the rampage continued, President Trump tweeted out a video expressing his sympathy for the rioters, sharing their grievances before finally asking them to leave the Capitol.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace.
It took authorities another 3.5 hours to end the insurrection and declare the Capitol safe. It was only then that Biden's victory was formalised.
The votes for President of the United States are as follows. Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 306 votes. Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida has received 232 votes.
And even then, after all of that, half of the Republican House members raised baseless objections. They voted against it, just hours after fleeing from the pro-Trump mob. Police searched the vehicles of those that they arrested. They found an arsenal of guns, ammunition, ropes, even a crossbow, evidence that things could have actually been even worse.
Yeah, they could have gotten worse, but then again, they weren't flash even as they were. At least 60 police were injured. 162 people have been charged so far, and the potential charges are numerous.
We're looking at everything from simple trespass to theft of mail, to theft of digital devices inside the Capitol, to assault on local officers, federal officers both outside and inside the Capitol, to the theft of potential national security information or national defense information, to felony murder, and even civil rights excessive force investigations.
Right now, people are just trying to wrap their heads around how exactly this happened. There are 4 different House committees conducting investigations into the failures of intelligence and security planning. Those 4 House committees there. And they'll be presumably looking into why some police officers were in full hand-to-hand combat with rioters while other police officers stood around doing absolutely nothing but occasionally posing for selfies with rioters. They'll also want to know why the Capitol Police was so severely underprepared when 3 days before the riot, their intelligence division produced a report warning that Congress could be the target of angry Trump supporters. And it wasn't just the spooks who knew. I had Australian FM radio stations calling me up for interviews about the possible threat before January 6th, so it wasn't exactly top secret. The even bigger question, though, is who to blame? Trump's certainly a hot favourite. Mitch McConnell pointed the finger today.
The mob was fed lies. They were provoked by the president and other powerful people.
And even Trump's ex-best bud, Bill Barr, said that Trump incited the march and that was, quote, a betrayal of his office. Barr also said that orchestrating a mob to pressure Congress is inexcusable. Although not everyone agrees it was Trump's fault. While 57% of Americans say Trump bears a great deal or good amount of responsibility for the Capitol attack, only 20% of Republicans say he does. Whereas a whopping 56% of Republicans say Trump bears no responsibility for the attacks on the Capitol. Now, that partisan result isn't a huge surprise, but the logic some Republicans have been using is that people had already headed over to the Capitol before Trump had even finished speaking. Not to mention the whole thing was clearly organised long before Trump's rally happened. Some attendees even turned up in special commemorative January 6 MAGA Civil War t-shirts. But who else could you blame? Some Democrats suspect Republican House members may have been working with the rioters. For instance, one of the rally organisers made this interesting video before he deleted it.
I was the person who came up with the January 6th idea with Congressman Gosar, Congressman Mo Brooks, and then Congressman Andy Biggs. We 4 schemed up of putting maximum pressure on Congress while they were voting so that who we couldn't lobby, we could change the hearts and the minds of Republicans who were in that body hearing our loud war from outside.
But now that video's gone poof. 30 Democrats also wrote a letter claiming that there'd been an extremely high number of outside groups in the Capitol the day before the riot. And that was particularly sus because access to the Capitol has been restricted since March last year due to the pandemic. And importantly, the Democrats reported these people to the Sergeant-at-Arms the day before the riots. So that could back up their theory a bit. Representative Steve Cohen actually named one of the tour conductors.
We saw Congressman Boebert taking a group of people for a tour sometime after the 3rd and before the 6th.
Sometime after the 3rd, before the 6th. But Lauren Boebert completely denied the allegation. She wrote, "I have never given a tour of the US Capitol to an outside group or insurrectionists." I should say, though, on the day of the riots, she also wrote, "Today is 1776." comparing the day to a revolution. So take what you will out of all of that. Finally, Lindsey Graham is somehow blaming Nancy Pelosi.
How in the hell could that happen? Where was Nancy Pelosi? It's her job to provide Capitol security. We'll get to the bottom of that.
I'll help you get to the bottom of it, Lindsay. Actually, the House and Senate are equally responsible for overseeing the Capitol Police. So you're kind of to blame as well. Nice try, Lindsay. And also, come on. I mean, really, Nancy Pelosi's at fault?
Bit of a long bow. All of which, of course, Chaz, led us to
the second impeachment of Donald J. Trump. Oh, for f***'s sake.
Donald Trump was, of course, already only the 3rd president to have ever been impeached, and last week he became the first to be impeached twice. The House earlier called on Vice President Pence to remove Trump under the 25th Amendment. He refused, so they pushed ahead with a single article of impeachment.
House Resolution 24 resolved that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors.
And the charge?
Incitement of insurrection. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other crimes and misdemeanors.
Pretty serious stuff there, Chaz, and unlike the first time that Trump was impeached in December 2019 for abusing his power, seeking foreign election interference, this time there was a measure of bipartisan support. 10 Republicans sided with the Democratic majority, including 3rd-ranked Republican Representative Liz Cheney.
And there's no question that the president formed the mob, the president incited the mob, the president addressed the mob, he lit the flame. This is what America is not.
Pretty much summed it up, but there were still plenty of Trump loyalists as well, like the always reliable Floridian Matt Gaetz, who was alleging a double standard.
The left in America has incited far more political violence than the right. For months, our cities burned, police stations burned, our businesses were shattered, and they said nothing.
But he was in the minority, so for the second time, Speaker Pelosi signed the impeachment of Donald Trump. It'll now go to a trial in the Senate with a Democratic majority and a Republican leader in Mitch McConnell who has not ruled out supporting Trump's conviction, and another vote which would disqualify Trump from running for office again. And that could prove quite attractive to Mitch McConnell, Chaz, and a bunch of other Republicans wanting to draw a line under the Trump era.
Yeah, and that could explain why this was easily the most bipartisan impeachment in history. No Democrats voted for Andrew Johnson's impeachment in 1868, no Republicans voted for Trump's first impeachment, and only 5 Democrats voted for Clinton's impeachment in 1998. So 10 is a record, although that compares to the 138 Republicans who voted to invalidate Pennsylvania's Electoral College results on January 6th. Now, to be fair, the Republicans may have been under some pretty intense pressure with that vote.
But the majority of them are actually paralyzed with fear. You know, I had a lot of conversations with my Republican colleagues last night, and a couple of them broke down in tears talking to me and saying that they are afraid for their lives if they vote for this impeachment.
Now, you might think that's just Democrat hype, but this is what one of the Republicans who did vote to impeach said.
I have colleagues who are now traveling with armed escorts out of the fear for their safety. Many of us are altering our routines, working to get body armor, which is a reimbursable purchase that we can make. It's sad that we have to get to that point, but our expectation is that someone may try to kill us.
Whoa. The question is, can you even remove an ex-president? Retired Judge Michael Luttig says that a former president by definition cannot be removed from office, and that the Constitution says that once the president's out of office, he'll be subjected to indictment, trial, judgment and punishment according to standard law. So therefore, it is too late to hold the trial now. But others have noted that legal precedent totally contradicts this. In 1797, the House impeached and the Senate removed a senator after he was kicked out of office. In 1876, the House impeached the Secretary of War after he resigned from office, and the House and Senate ruled specifically that resignation could not terminate the impeachment process, and so it goes. Another potential defence for Trump is the one I mentioned before from Lee Zeldin, that the rally was pre-planned and the rioting started while the president was still speaking, so he can't have been the one who incited it. Of course, that doesn't mean that Trump didn't incite the rioting with his conduct over the previous 2 months. For example, the password for reporters at Trump's January 4 rally in Georgia was literally "See you January 6." So he was promoting that rally pretty hard. Finally, Lindsey Graham has this reason to reject removal. The Senate should vote to dismiss the article of impeachment because we will be delaying indefinitely, if not forever, the healing of this great nation if we do otherwise. Trump hasn't even left office yet. It might be a bit soon for his supporters to try that kumbaya, let's all get along line, but regardless of what happens with the trial, John, someone is going to get punished. And that's Liz Cheney. Sean Hannity's certainly got her number.
Liz Cheney, I have a message for those 10 Republicans. Good luck in your new Democratic Party. Liz, I used to like you, liked your dad. You do not belong in leadership. Good luck working with your Democratic colleagues.
And the House Freedom Caucus have already circulated a petition calling on Cheney to resign from her post. Some of her Wyoming constituents have also passed a unanimous resolution for her to go as well. But before you award her the badge of courage, remember, Trump had her in his sights even before the riot.
And we got to get rid of the weak Congress people, the ones that aren't any good, the Liz Cheneys of the world. We got to get rid of them.
So there's a bit of self-defence there from Liz Cheney when she took Trump on. I reckon, though, she's in more trouble than he is at the moment.
Yeah, and those are the battle lines, the Trump wing and the Cheney wing of the Republican Party. Well, joining us now is former National Security Advisor for Donald Trump and US Ambassador to the UN under George W. Bush, John Bolton. Ambassador Bolton, welcome back to Planet America.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
What have you made of President Trump's behaviour since the election? Falsely claiming victory and to have had the election stolen from him, and then, of course, inciting the riots against the Capitol.
Well, it's been disgraceful, really, is the only way to describe it. I think it's caused considerable harm both to the country and certainly to the Republican Party in denying what became increasingly obvious, that he had lost the election. He and his campaign had many, many opportunities to prove his allegations of systematic fraud, that the election had been stolen, a lot of variations on that. He struck out in every state administrative proceeding, every court case that he brought, and yet he persisted that he had won the election really by a landslide. I think that had a very unfortunate effect on many of his supporters. I think the Republican leadership did not do an adequate job in refuting these claims so that in the minds of many people, they heard the president say it, they didn't hear anybody contradict him, or at least they didn't hear any Republicans contradict him, and they came to believe it. And it just got worse and worse, leading to the decision that the president would try to block congressional certification of the Electoral College vote on January the 6th. And that in turn led to the president really being responsible for this mob that invaded the Capitol grounds in an effort to prevent the certification from taking place.
And what is your view of his second impeachment and the prospect of a Senate trial, possible conviction, and even disqualifying from running for president again?
Well, my own view, and I've studied this pretty carefully, is I don't think the Constitution permits a Senate trial once the president has left office. I won't get into an extended discussion of the constitutional text and structure. That's probably, my view is probably a minority point of view, but I think it's certainly going to be one of the issues that the Senate discusses. I think, as I say, I think the conduct on January the 6th was unacceptable, probably does amount to an impeachable offense, but I think we all have to ask the prudential question, is the country better off going through an impeachment and trial than not, and allowing Trump to be prosecuted possibly for criminal violations? In terms of the impeachment process, I think the question is, if you really want to hurt Donald Trump, if you want to do the most possible damage to him, the thing to do is ignore him and not try him for impeachment.
Hearing your pretty damning assessment of Donald Trump in recent times, a lot of us have been a little concerned that this guy is banned from Twitter and yet he still has the nuclear codes. He could launch an attack at any moment. Should we have been concerned that this guy had the nuclear football?
Well, he doesn't have it, actually. A military aide has the nuclear football. It's contrary to what some Hollywood producers think happens. It's not just a question of taking the card out of his pocket and dialing up the strategic command and saying launch. It's considerably more complicated than that. No, I never really felt there was that kind of danger. I do think that Trump doesn't pay much attention to norms or conventions, and I think the decisions he's making on extensive pardons at the end of his administration really take that beyond any normal presidential desire to wrap up unfinished business at the end of the term. But that's really to exaggerate the danger beyond what we already saw, I think makes it harder to explain why Trump was a problem. If you get too far removed in the criticism, it gets to the point where people don't believe the threat is real. I think the damage he did was real. You don't need to exaggerate it. It was bad enough. Now the task is to correct it.
John Bolton, now that we're at the end of the Trump era, how would you characterise his presidency? What is his legacy?
Well, you know, in America, we have a game of rating the presidents, who's the best president, who's the worst president. So Trump was the 45th president. The current holder of the worst president title in virtually every survey I've seen is James Buchanan, who presided over the dissolution of the Union in 1860 and 1861. But it's pretty hard to get worse than that. I think Trump's the man to give him a run for his money, though.
John Bolton, thank you for being with us on Planet America.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, there will be a lot of attention on President Biden's inaugural address tomorrow, of course. It's a platform that a lot of his predecessors have used to try and define their mission and reunite a deeply divided nation, although it hasn't always gone exactly to plan. There have been plenty of memorable moments in presidential inaugural speeches. In 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt warned against America's self-fulfilling crisis of confidence.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror.
That helped set an optimistic tone, helping to restore the banking system and eventually the economy. But if government was the answer to the economic woes of the 1930s, by the 1980s, Ronald Reagan argued government was now the problem.
It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
For a time in between, the nation and the government had been seen as one and the same. In 1961, at the height of the Cold War, John F. Kennedy, the first president born in the 20th century, said a torch had been passed to a new generation and he called on them to serve.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
One of the worst inaugural addresses came after James Buchanan took the oath of office in 1857. He told Congress not to concern itself with the issue of slavery. He claimed the whole abolition debate was bad, even for the slaves.
It has been the prolific source of great evils to the master, to the slave, and to the whole country.
4 years later, Abraham Lincoln's election helped trigger a civil war over slavery, although in his first inaugural address, he tried to keep the Union together.
We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection.
But broken they were. By 1865, 620,000 Americans lay dead. Union forces stood on the verge of victory over the Confederate slave states. Lincoln called for reconciliation with words that have now been etched into American history.
With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds.
And 2 months later, the Civil War would end, but not before Lincoln himself was shot and killed. The prize for the most ill-fated inaugural address, though, probably goes to William Henry Harrison, America's 9th president, and at 68, its oldest to that date. He took the oath outside on a bitterly cold, wet day in March 1841.
Called from a retirement which I had supposed was to continue for the residue of my life, I appear before you, fellow citizens, to take the oath.
Harrison's 8,500-word speech was the longest in history. It took almost 2 bone-chilling and very boring hours. He famously refused to wear an overcoat or hat. Within 3 weeks, Harrison was sickly and frail. Doctors diagnosed a cold, then pneumonia. Experts now think it may have been typhoid fever from Washington's dirty drinking water. Either way, within 31 days, he was dead. A warning perhaps to his successors to keep it brief. As for incoming President Joe Biden, he'll take the oath after a disputed election and a deadly insurrection. He inherits a public health disaster and an economy decimated by pandemic. It is a task of historic proportions and one that words alone won't fix.